Nora Vance had been at Naval Medical Center for exactly 6 weeks when the whispers started following her down the hallway. She was too young, too quiet, too green. That was the verdict the senior nurses had reached before she'd even finished her first shift. Nora didn't argue. She just showed up early, memorized every patient chart twice, and kept her head down. But being quiet made her a target, and on a slow Tuesday afternoon, that target got painted right on her back. Denise, the charge nurse who ran the trauma floor like her own kingdom, sauntered up with a smirk she wasn't even trying to hide. "Got a new admit for you, Vance. Rear Admiral coming in from the base, gunshot wound to the shoulder. He's deaf, lost his hearing in some overseas op. Should be easy for you, right? Real quiet patient." The nurses behind her laughed just a little too hard, and Nora understood immediately. They wanted her to fail. They wanted to watch the rookie flounder in front of a decorated officer, unable to communicate, unable to cope, so they could point and say, "See, we told you she wasn't ready." Nobody had bothered to mention that Nora had spent 3 years volunteering at a school for the deaf before nursing school, that she'd learned sign language before she'd learned how to start in 4. She said nothing. She simply nodded, took the chart, and walked toward the trauma bay, her heart hammering. Not from fear, but from the electric anticipation of proving every single one of them wrong. When she pushed through the doors, the scene was chaos. A gurney rolled in surrounded by a tangle of naval officers, sailors in dress whites stained with blood, and doctors barking orders no one on the gurney could hear. The man on it was easily 60, silver-haired, jaw set like granite, blood soaking through the bandage on his shoulder, and his eyes were scanning the room with the sharp, controlled panic of someone cut off from every voice around him.
Rear Admiral Marcus Hale.
Nora had read the name twice on the chart, but nothing prepared her for the presence of the man himself. The ER doctor was shouting questions at him, useless and unheard, while 2 junior nurses hovered awkwardly, unsure what to do, and a small crowd of hospital staff had gathered by the front desk. Denise among them, arms crossed, waiting for the show to begin. Nora walked straight to the Admiral's bedside, planted herself directly in his line of sight, and raised her hands. She signed slowly, deliberately. "My name is Nora. I am your nurse. You are safe." The Admiral froze. His eyes locked onto her hands like a drowning man grabbing a rope. For the first time since he'd been wheeled through those doors, his shoulders dropped half an inch. He signed back, fast and urgent. "Nobody here can talk to me. I've been trying to tell them for 10 minutes. The bullet's still in there. I know exactly where. I felt it hit." Nora nodded and turned to the trauma team, translating in real time, her voice steady and clear even as the room around her went absolutely silent. Doctors stopped mid-sentence. Nurses stopped whispering. Even Denise's smirk began to falter as she watched Nora move fluidly between the Admiral's rapid signing and the medical team's urgent questions, bridging a gap nobody else in that hospital even knew how to cross. "He says the entry wound is higher than it looks. There's a second fragment lodged near the clavicle, and he wants you to know his blood pressure always runs low, so don't panic if it reads under 90. Nora relayed, her hands never stopping their steady conversation with the man on the gurney. The lead trauma surgeon, Dr. Whitfield, looked up sharply. "How long has he been trying to tell us that?" "Since he arrived," Nora said flatly. Nobody asked him. Nobody could. The words hit the room like a slap. Nurses who had laughed 20 minutes earlier now stood rigid, refusing to meet each other's eyes. The Admiral's hand found Nora's wrist, gripping it with surprising strength for a man losing blood, and he signed one more thing before the sedation took hold. "Thank you for seeing me." Nora simply nodded, her throat tight, and turned back to the surgical team without a single glance at Denise, because for the first time in 6 weeks, she didn't need anyone's approval. She had already proven, in less than 5 minutes, exactly who she was. If you love watching underestimated heroes rise up and silence every single doubter, hit that subscribe button right now, because the story is only getting started, and what Admiral Hale does next will leave this entire hospital speechless. 3 hours later, Admiral Marcus Hale came out of surgery with 2 fragments removed and a prognosis that made the entire trauma team exhale in relief. But it wasn't the surgery that had the hospital buzzing. It was what happened in the recovery wing afterward. Nora had been assigned to his post-op care, a decision made not by Denise, who conveniently avoided eye contact with her for the rest of the shift, but by Dr. Whitfield himself, who'd quietly requested the nurse who actually knows how to talk to my patient. When the Admiral woke, groggy but lucid, the first thing he did was search the room until he found Nora's face, and his hands moved before his voice ever could. "Where did you learn to sign like that?" he asked, fingers still shaky from the anesthesia. Nora smiled and explained about the deaf school, about the years she'd spent learning a language most people never bothered to notice existed, about how she'd never expected it to matter in a place like this until today. The Admiral studied her for a long moment, and something shifted behind his eyes, an old soldier's instinct for recognizing quality when he finally saw it. He signed slowly. "Do you know why I go on missions nobody talks about?" Nora shook her head. "Because I learned a long time ago that the people who go unnoticed are usually the ones who save everyone else." He nodded toward the door, toward the hallway where nurses had gathered under the pretense of restocking supply carts, clearly trying to overhear. "They didn't see you either, until they had no choice." Word of what happened in that trauma bay had already ripped through the hospital by the time the shift changed. The story mutated as it traveled. Some said Nora had saved the Admiral's life single-handedly. Others said she'd caught a medical error that would have killed him, and while neither version was entirely accurate, the truth was dramatic enough on its own. A rookie nurse everyone had dismissed had been the only person in the building capable of understanding a decorated Navy officer in his most vulnerable moment. Denise found Nora in the break room that evening, arms crossed, though her usual smirk had been replaced with something closer to discomfort. "I didn't know you signed," she said, as close to an apology as she was probably capable of giving. "You didn't ask?" Nora replied simply, not with anger, just with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed anyone's validation. Denise lingered, clearly wanting to say more, but eventually just nodded and walked away, and something in the set of her shoulders told Nora that the whispers in this hospital were about to sound very different from now on. 2 days later, Admiral Hale requested a meeting with hospital administration before his discharge, a request that sent a ripple of anxiety through the entire nursing staff, because nobody knew what a decorated officer might say about the treatment he'd received. What he said left the room in stunned silence. He commended the hospital's medical care, praised the surgical team's speed and precision, and then specifically named Nora Vance as the reason he was walking out of that building without complications that could have cost him his mobility or worse, his life. He requested, and the administration quickly approved, that Nora be permanently assigned as a liaison for deaf and hard-of-hearing patients moving through the trauma department, a role that hadn't existed until that Tuesday afternoon, and one that instantly elevated her from rookie to indispensable. As he was wheeled out to a car waiting to take him back to base, Admiral Hale stopped the gurney beside Nora one final time. He signed slowly, making sure every word landed. "The Navy trains us to notice what everyone else misses. You already knew how to do that before you ever met me. Don't let this place convince you otherwise." Nora watched him go, her chest tight with something between pride and disbelief, understanding that a single afternoon meant to embarrass her had instead revealed exactly the kind of nurse, and the kind of person, she truly was. The coworkers who once treated her like an inconvenience now treated her like someone whose skills they desperately wished they'd bothered to notice sooner. And Nora, for her part, simply went back to work, quietly excellent, exactly as she'd always been. If the story moved you, if you believe the quiet ones are often the strongest ones in the room, make sure you're subscribed, because every single episode on this channel proves that underestimated people are usually the ones who change everything.